Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving into a potential COVID-19 treatment that's been making some noise lately. Are you ready for this? Researchers have been looking at something called Wharton's jelly, mesenchymal stem cells, WJMSCs for short. They've been using them in a phase 1 clinical trial with some pretty interesting results.
Yeah, it might sound a little bit like it's straight out of science fiction, but Wharton's jelly is actually a substance that's found in the umbilical cord. And it just so happens that it's a rich source of these very special cells.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. So what exactly are these WJMSCs, and how do they end up being tested as a potential treatment for severe COVID-19? That's exactly what we're going to be unpacking in this deep dive.
All right, so to understand WJMSCs, we first need to talk about mesenchymal stem cells in general. They're kind of like the body's handyman, able to both modulate the immune system and differentiate into other cell types.
Hold on. Let's rewind for a sec. What exactly does it mean to modulate the immune system? And what's so special about this whole being able to differentiate into other cell types? I feel like we're about to unlock some seriously cool scientific secrets.
Okay, think about it this way. Your immune system is like an army that's constantly fighting off invaders, but sometimes it can overreact, and it can actually end up doing more harm than good. Mesenchymal stem cells actually have this unique ability to either boost or suppress the immune response. They're kind of like a skilled diplomat who negotiates a peace treaty.
So they're like the peacekeepers of our immune system, making sure things don't get too out of control.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And their ability to differentiate, that's equally remarkable. They're able to actually transform into other cell types, like bone cells, cartilage cells, even muscle cells. It really makes them incredibly versatile for potential therapeutic applications.
Okay, I'm starting to see why scientists are getting so excited about these cells. But what makes WJMSCs different from other types of mesenchymal stem cells? Why not just use any old stem cells?
Well, what's so fascinating is where they come from. WJMSCs actually come from umbilical cord tissue, which makes them super accessible, and their isolation is non-invasive. Plus, they seem to have even greater potential to differentiate compared to stem cells from other sources.
So they're easily accessible, ethically sourced, and potentially even more powerful.
Yeah.
Sounds like we've hit the jackpot.
It's definitely a really exciting area of research. And this clinical trial, it's a perfect example of how WJMSCs are being explored as a potential treatment for some really tough conditions like severe COVID-19.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of that trial. What can you tell us about the patients that were involved and how these WJMSCs were actually administered?
Okay, so the trial was conducted at Shariati Hospital in Tehran, Iran. It involved 5 patients with severe COVID-19, all of whom met the World Health Organization's criteria for severe disease. Each patient received 3 intravenous injections of WJMSCs, and these injections were spaced 3 days apart. Now get this, each injection contained a whopping 150 million cells.
150 million cells. Whoa, that's a lot of cellular power packed into each injection. I'm curious, were there any safety concerns about using that many cells, especially in patients who are already so sick?
Well, safety is always the top priority in any clinical trial, especially when you're using a brand new therapy. The good news is that there were no serious complications observed at all. There was one patient who reported having a mild headache. That resolved without even needing medication. But overall, the treatment was really well tolerated.
That is a huge relief, so no major red flags when it comes to safety. But let's talk about the million-dollar question. Did they see any improvements in these patients after receiving the WJMSCs?
Well, they did observe a number of positive changes. One of the most exciting findings was that there was an increase in what's called CD4 and CD8 T cell markers after the treatment.
Okay, quick immunology refresher here. What exactly do CD4 and CD8 T cells do again?
Just think of CD8 T cells as like the special forces. They directly target and eliminate any virus-infected cells.
Right, so they're the ones on the front lines going head-to-head with the virus.
Exactly. Now, CD4 T cells, they're more like the intelligence officers. They actually play a really key role in coordinating the entire immune response. They're helping to activate other immune cells and support antibody production.
So the CD4 T cells are like the strategist, making sure the immune system is organized and ready for battle.
You got it. And this increase in these markers after WJMSC treatment, it suggests that the therapy might actually be helping to boost that immune response against the virus.
That's really promising. But as we all know, COVID-19 is more than just a virus hanging out in the body. It also triggers this massive inflammatory response. Sometimes it's called a cytokine storm, which can be really damaging. Did the researchers look into whether WJ-MSCs had any effect on this whole inflammatory cascade at all?
They did. They analyzed blood samples from the patients, and they observed some interesting changes in what are called cytokine levels after the WJ-MSC treatment. Specifically, they saw an increase in IL-10 and SDF1, both of which are known to have anti-inflammatory and tissue repair properties.
So those are the good guys. They're hoping to calm down the storm, so to speak.
Exactly. And at the same time, they saw a decrease in several pro-inflammatory cytokines, including one that's called TNFA, which is a real key driver of that damaging cytokine storm.
So not only are the WJ-MSCs potentially boosting the immune system's ability to fight the virus, but they're also helping to control that excessive inflammatory response.
That seems to be exactly what the data is suggesting. It seems like they're modulating the immune response, dialing down the bad inflammation, while boosting the good stuff.
This is fascinating. I'm also thinking about those long-term consequences of COVID-19, especially that potential for lung damage. Did this study show any signs of improvement in lung function at all after the WJ-MSC treatment?
Yes, they did. They used lung CT scans to actually assess lung health before and after treatment, and they found some encouraging results.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Give me the good news.
The CT scans showed that there was a reduction in the overall score of lung involvement, which suggests an improvement in lung health. And none of the patients developed something called pleural effusion, which is a buildup of fluid around the lungs.
That's great. Any other positive signs from those scans?
Well, perhaps most importantly, there is no evidence of pulmonary fibrosis. That's the scarring of the lungs in any of the patients.
Hold on, pulmonary fibrosis, isn't that the type of lung damage that can have really long-lasting effects? So to see no signs of it after the WJ-MSC treatment, that's incredibly encouraging.
You're right. The potential for WJ-MSCs to actually prevent long-term lung damage, it's a major point of interest in this whole research.
This is all incredibly promising, but I think we need to stay grounded in scientific rigor here. This was a pretty small preliminary study, right? I mean, 5 patients is a very small sample size.
You're absolutely right. We can't draw any definitive conclusions from these results alone, but the findings are definitely encouraging, and they warrant further investigation. What we really need are much larger controlled clinical trials to really confirm the safety and efficacy of WJ-MSC therapy for COVID-19.
Larger trials, control groups, the gold standard of scientific research. We'll definitely be keeping a close eye as more research comes out. But for now, it seems like this Wharton's jelly, this substance that I think most people have probably never even heard of, it might hold real promise for treating severe COVID-19. Who knew?
That's the beauty of science. It's always full of surprises. And this deep dive is just getting started. There's another fascinating aspect of this study that I think we should explore. The impact of WJ-MSCs on antibody levels.
The antibodies, you mean those proteins our immune system makes to fight off infections? Did the WJ-MSCs have an effect on those too?
They did, and this is where that concept of immunomodulation that we talked about earlier really comes into play. But to fully understand what's going on, we need to dive a little deeper into the world of antibodies. Ready for round 2 of this deep dive?
Absolutely. Lead the way.
So antibodies, they're these specialized proteins
Yeah.
that our immune system produces to target and neutralize invaders, like viruses.
Right. Antibodies. I remember learning about those back in school. They're kind of like the guided missiles of the immune system, specifically designed to seek and destroy their target.
That's a great analogy. And in this study, the researchers found that the patient's COVID-19 antibody levels actually increased within 14 days of receiving the WJ-MSC injections.
Okay, that's interesting. But how would WJ-MSCs, which are stem cells, how would they influence antibody production at all? Aren't antibodies made by a totally different type of immune cell?
You're right. Antibodies are mainly produced by B cells, but remember those CD4 T cells we talked about earlier, the intelligence officers of the immune system? Well, they actually play a crucial role in helping B cells produce antibodies.
So it's team effort. The CD4 T cells are providing the intel and the support, and the B cells are the ones that are actually manufacturing the antibodies.
Exactly. And it seems like WJ-MSCs might be enhancing this entire collaboration, making the whole process even more efficient.
So it's not that the WJ-MSCs are directly producing the antibodies themselves, but they're supporting the cells that do. They're like the logistical support team, making sure those antibody factories have all the resources they need to operate at peak capacity.
I like that analogy. It really highlights how complex the interplay is between all these different types of cells in the immune response. And it also reinforces this whole idea that WJ-MSCs are acting as immunomodulators. They're fine-tuning that immune response. instead of just directly attacking the virus.
This is all starting to make sense now. But let's not forget that this was a very small study. Do we know for sure that this increase in antibody levels was actually directly caused by the WJMSCs?
That's a really important point. While the researchers did observe a correlation between the WJMSC treatment and increased antibody levels, we can't definitively say that it was the only cause. Without doing a larger controlled study, there could be other factors at play.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
More research is definitely needed to confirm these findings. But even so, the potential for WJMSCs to boost antibody production is fascinating. Could this have any implications for vaccine development at all, I wonder?
That's a really interesting question. It's definitely an area worth exploring. Could WJMSCs actually be used as a sort of adjuvant, a substance that enhances the immune response to vaccines? It's possible. But it's still super early in terms of research.
All right, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
But it is exciting to think about the potential ripple effects of all this research.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there was another interesting aspect of this study that you wanted to talk about. Something about SDF1. Remind me what that is again.
Yes, SDF1 stands for stromal cell-derived factor 1 and is a type of cytokine, a signaling molecule that plays a role in attracting stem cells to areas of injury or inflammation.
Cytokines, right. Those are the messengers of the immune system. So SDF1 is like a homing beacon, guiding those stem cells to where they're needed most.
Exactly. And in this study, the researchers actually found that SDF1 levels increased after the WJMSC treatment.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. They were measuring SDF1 to see if the injected WJMSCs were actually finding their way to the lungs, which is the main site of infection in COVID-19.
You got it. The increase in SDF1 suggests that the WJMSCs were indeed homing in on the lungs.
But not only are these WJMSCs modulating the immune response
Right.
and potentially boosting antibody production, but they're also actively migrating to the site of damage. They're like the ultimate repair crew.
That's a great way to put it. And this finding actually further supports the idea that WJMSCs could be particularly effective in treating lung injuries, and not just those caused by COVID-19.
Wait, are you saying that WJMSCs could potentially be used to treat other lung conditions too?
There's definitely growing evidence to suggest that. Mesenchymal stem cells, including WJMSCs, have actually shown some promise in treating something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. It's a really serious lung condition that can be caused by a whole bunch of different things, including infections, trauma, and sepsis.
So we started with a potential COVID-19 treatment, and now we're talking about a whole new frontier in respiratory medicine. This is amazing.
It's true. The potential applications for WJMSCs are huge, and this research is really only just scratching the surface.
Okay, I'm officially blown away. But before we get too carried away, I think it's important to remember that more research is needed to really fully understand those long-term effects and the best ways to use WJMSCs.
I agree. We need to move forward carefully and with scientific rigor. But these initial findings are definitely exciting, and they really do point to a future where WJMSCs could play a major role in medicine.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information, but it's left me feeling really optimistic about the future of medicine. Who would have thought that Wharton's jelly, this thing that most people have probably never even heard of, could have such incredible potential?
It just goes to show that sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from the most unexpected places. And this is just one example of the many innovative therapies that are being explored right now to combat not just COVID-19, but a whole range of diseases.
Speaking of other diseases, this brings us to another big question. Given all the potential benefits that we've talked about, the immunomodulation, the tissue repair, that potential to boost antibody production, could WJMSC therapy have implications beyond COVID-19? Could these cells be used to treat other conditions too?
That's a question that deserves its own deep dive, and luckily, we have time for one more round. Are you ready to explore the broader potential of WJMSCs?
Absolutely. Let's dive in. All right, so we've seen how these WJMSCs could be really helpful in treating severe COVID-19, but could they actually hold the key to treating other diseases too? I mean, it seems like their ability to fine-tune the immune system and repair tissues could have some pretty amazing applications.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Researchers are exploring WJMSCs for a whole bunch of different conditions, and the possibilities are really pretty remarkable.
All right, give me the highlights. What are some of the areas where WJMSCs are showing the most promise?
Well, one area that's really exciting is autoimmune diseases. So these are conditions where the immune system is basically mistakenly attacking the body's own tissues. Things like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and inflammatory bowel disease.
Right. Those are the diseases where the immune system kind of turns against itself. And it sounds like WJMSCs could be like a peace treaty in those cases, calming down that overactive immune response.
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. WJMSCs have actually shown potential in preclinical studies to suppress those harmful immune reactions that are driving these conditions.
That's incredible. And what about organ repair? We talked earlier about WJMSCs being able to differentiate into other cell types. Could that actually be used to repair damaged organs?
That's another area of really active research. Studies are looking into using WJMSCs to treat all sorts of things, from heart damage after a heart attack to liver disease.
So instead of just managing the symptoms, we could actually use WJMSCs to repair the damage at the cellular level. That could completely change the game.
It really could. Just imagine being able to regenerate damaged heart tissue or help a failing liver heal itself. The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing.
This is some seriously groundbreaking stuff. But let's be realistic for a minute. We're still in those early stages of research, and I'm sure there are still challenges ahead. What are some of the hurdles that researchers are going to need to overcome before WJMSC therapy can become like a mainstream treatment?
One of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to scale up production. Right now, WJMSCs are mainly isolated from donated umbilical cords, which really limits the supply.
Right, it's not like we have this endless supply of umbilical cords just sitting around.
Exactly. So researchers are trying to figure out ways to produce WJMSCs on a much larger scale, maybe using things like bioreactors or other new technologies.
That makes sense. We need to make sure there's enough to go around. If this therapy is as effective as we think it might be, what other challenges are there?
Another big one is making sure that WJMSC therapy is safe and effective in the long term. The early studies are showing some promising results, but we really need a lot more long-term data to confirm that these cells don't pose any unforeseen risks down the road.
Right, safety is always the most important thing, especially when we're dealing with a brand new therapy. What are scientists doing to make sure it's safe?
Well, they're conducting really rigorous preclinical and clinical trials, carefully monitoring patients for any kind of adverse effects. They're also looking into ways to improve how WJMSCs are delivered and targeted to make sure they get to the right tissues and do their job without causing any unwanted side effects.
It sounds like there's still a lot of work to do. But the progress that's being made, it's really inspiring. This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey, from this mysterious world of Wharton's jelly to the forefront of medical innovation.
It really has been an incredible exploration, and it really highlights the power of scientific curiosity and why it's so important to keep investing in research. We never know where that next big breakthrough is going to come from. But one thing's for sure, the future of medicine, it's full of possibilities.
Well, you've definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners are feeling just as inspired as I am. So to wrap up this fascinating conversation, let's leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. If more research confirms that WJMSC therapy is safe and effective, what kind of impact could this have on the future of medicine? Could WJMSCs actually become a regular tool in our fight against all sorts of diseases?
It's definitely a question that really sparks the imagination. Will we see a future where WJMSCs are used all the time to treat autoimmune diseases, repair damaged organs, and even make vaccines even more effective? I guess only time will tell. But the possibilities are huge, and the research is moving forward at an amazing pace.
And that's a perfect note to end on. Until next time, keep diving deep.